Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. Even after the Supreme Court passed marriage equality as the law of the land 8 years ago, these days gay, trans, and queer rights seem to be under attack across the country. And that attack is both conceptual, with several states imitating Florida's Don't Say Gay bill, and also hard, cold reality, with the latest outrage, a gay man stabbed to death for dancing in a Brooklyn gas station. But the fact is, especially here in the Bronx, pride is the name of the game, with pride flags raised at Borough Hall and a Bronx woman at the helm of the new pride agenda. Tonight, we have invited her and a representative from the borough president's LGBTQIA+ task force to talk about a range of issues that affect Bronx LGBTQIA+ people. They didn't think I could get all those letters right, but I did. Please join me in welcoming the executive director of the New Pride Agenda. We're thrilled to have Elisa Crespo with us. Nice to have you, Ms. Crespo.
Thanks for having me.
And the Education Youth Services Liaison of the Office of the Bronx Borough President and a member of the LGBTQIA+ task force, Nereida Gomez. Nice to have you with Ms. Gomez.
Thank you, Kelly.
Let's get started with you, Ms. Crespo. First of all, congratulations on being on the cover of City and State New York. That was pretty exciting, wasn't it?
Thank you.
In my mind, it's the best political magazine in the state, and there you are on the cover. And I said, you know what? If Elisa Crespo is going to be on, we got to have her with us. Let's just get into why you were there. The Empire State Agenda called it quits in 2015. Talk about the New Pride Agenda that was founded 4 years later. What is the agenda now, and how does it attempt to move pride issues into the future, picking up from what the ESPA has done?
Sure. So the New Pride Agenda's agenda is to build statewide power across New York and to prepare a new generation of LGBTQ leaders to take on contemporary issues that we're facing today. Fundamentally, we do two things. We do public policy work, advocacy, and we also offer programs around economic empowerment, health and wellness, civic engagement, support groups, et cetera. We, as you said, were formed in 2019, so we'll be 5 years old next January, which we're very excited about. And I've been with the organization for 2 years now. And so we're really picking up the mantle that was put down in 2015. And I think that the biggest difference is that we are directly impacted by many of the issues that we are advocating for, which I think is somewhat of a change from the past. Our target audience are LGBTQ people who are living on the margins. So queer and trans youth, people of color, trans people in general, and those who have been ostracized or pushed to the margins as we know it.
You used the word in a previous discussion we had, and we talked about it just before the show, marginalized.
Yes.
How are they marginalized? What do you mean by marginalized? And then, of course, how do we attack it head on and change the dynamic?
So what we mean are, when you think of LGBTQ people, even in New York, but perhaps globally, we're leading the charge in the most despairing things when it comes to suicide ideation, when it comes to health disparities, homelessness, food insecurity, income inequality. Those are the issues that we're trying to tackle at the New Pride Agenda, to move our LGBTQ movement to a post-marriage equality movement, and one that focuses on social and economic rights. I think the story of a lot of queer and trans people in America and globally is sometimes our first interaction with discrimination is in the home. And that starts a cycle of poverty, of criminalization, of survival economics, of chronic illness, et cetera. And so
I have to say that just saddens me directly, but go ahead.
It is sad. But the best way, I think, to support our young people is to accept them for who they are and to learn to love them. Because if you have a home, then you have access to succeed, to thrive, to get a job, to go to school. You have a roof over your head, you have food on the table, and you have a support system.
Before we bring Ms. Gomez into the conversation, the tenor right now, as I identified in America, across America, for the first time that I could remember, there's real public, outrage about who people have chosen to be. And that's somewhat scary to me, of course, given the way that I was brought up here in the Bronx and, about learning about fairness and acceptance.
Sure.
I hate the word tolerance. I mean, we're not tolerating anything, we're just accepting people. Is it a bigger challenge now, or is New York, did we kind of carve out a nice enclave of communities that, at least like the Bronx, understand who people are?
Well, I don't think that New York is immune from homophobia and transphobia. In fact, we saw that just recently with the death of O'Shea Sibley in Brooklyn. So I think nowhere is safe. I think what we are seeing is a manufactured political crisis by right-wing extremists. We are having a nationalist movement in this country that is really pushing homophobia and transphobia as a pathway all the way to the White House. And so when politicians use anti-LGBTQ rhetoric and make it acceptable and normalize it, everyday people are more emboldened to repeat that.
Accept it, yes.
Yeah.
Ms. Gomez, I like to think that the Bronx is different from everywhere in the world. I know our Bronx Borough President, Vanessa Gibson, takes these issues very seriously. Talk about the task force that she has put together, and what are the agendas to address all of the issues that we just heard about. I want to get some optimism here, because it's tough to hear that stuff, especially about people who we know as our friends and our neighbors, et cetera. So what is the Borough President's Office working on?
Absolutely, Gary. So first, thank you so much for having me and for always including us.
Well, inclusion is the theme of our show here in general, and BronxNet Television in general. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So in terms of the Borough President's Office and our LGBTQIA plus task force, there are really two parts of the task force. There is the internal part, where we are made up of staff in different departments that come together, including policy, including education and youth, to kind of look at the issues and the work that we do day to day with the lens of how we are supporting our LGBTQ community.
I just want to ask you about that, just to be clear. So what you're saying is, and obviously the borough president has all different offices, and so those people sit with you, or at least consult with, we're going to do this, and then do it through, as you said, the lens of our vision, so that what goes on and comes out of the borough president's office is coordinated along with everything else they have to deal with through this idea, through this task force.
Yes, somewhat. So making sure that we are in supporting the community, understanding the nuances that LGBTQ people face, and then also anchoring the broader task force with external partners, our community-based organizations, our healthcare institutions, our business community and community advocates, to create a space for everyone to come together so that we are working on policy issues, working on not working in silos so that we are maximizing impact, because as we know, intention doesn't always equal impact. While also reacting to the community needs and identifying spaces and gaps and ways that we can be supportive.
I guess so. Having you sit next to Elisa Crespo of the New Pride Agenda is not too bad an idea. This is what we're talking about. How are Bronx LGBTQIA plus people doing? What's your assessment of what the needs are? How desperate are they, et cetera? I have some numbers. I'll let you answer, and then we'll pull out some numbers that I think are pretty interesting.
Absolutely. So I'm not sure. I've looked at the data lately, and as we know, data is always changing.
I get it.
But one of the issues that we've heard, or rather that we were able to react to in the past, was during the pandemic, during the outbreak of monkeypox, where we followed data and saw that Bronxites were most heavily affected throughout the city. So working with our task force, with our partners in government, the Department of Health, Destination Tomorrow, coming together, identifying those trends, and then saying, okay, we need to react, we need to identify a solution. We were able to open up a sexual health clinic here in the Bronx to make sure.
That's pretty exciting. I have to say, I'm sure you know, I moderated one of the forums for monkeypox. I found it particularly interesting because I heard the expressions of people who were expressing what we just heard from Ms. Crespo about being marginalized, saying, well, wait a minute, we've got this problem, who's helping us? And I guess so congratulations to the borough president and her staff and people like you for doing that. One of the things that came up, and we were just talking about it before the program, the New York State LGBT Health and Human Services offices did a needs assessment. And in the Bronx, they found that 2 in 5 people who are LGBT people said that they were homeless at some point in their lives. I thought that was incredibly sad. 2 out of 5, that's 40% of gay and trans people in the Bronx say that they're homeless. How do we look at that? How do we deal with that? I guess then we got to bring in the borough president's housing people and take a look. What are the issues there? And then we'll go back to you to talk about housing in general. But how do you see it, and how does the borough president see it?
Absolutely, Gary. And just so you know, we do have housing folks on the task force as well. So
that's good.
That's one thing. But
put a check mark next to it.
It goes back to what Elisa was discussing. Many of our homeless LGBTQ population are youth, and that's kind of what we're hearing. And with that comes a multitude of issues, and not to make you sad again, Gary, many of them.
No, listen, we want reality. This show is about reality.
Absolutely. It starts with young people not feeling safe, not having spaces to feel safe, sometimes not being accepted in the home.
In their own homes. So they have to make the decision whether they are going to stay or whether they are going to try to kind of make it on their own. Mm-hmm.
So, it is something that we are aware of. And with that in itself comes the nuances of getting young people, keeping them off the streets when it comes to gang violence and anti-gun violence, but now also dealing with the struggles of identity and finding yourself in addition to the housing insecurity and everything else.
Ms. Crespo, let's just talk about, we'll start there in housing. Do we need separate types of housing to deal with this? Or is this just so intertwined with our obvious issues with affordable housing throughout the city, not only in the Bronx? How do we address this particularly disturbing number?
Yeah, so 40% of homeless youth in New York City identify as LGBTQ. So we're talking citywide. I do think we need specific kind of targeted housing for our community. However, that's not allowed, right, according to fair housing law.
And I think that kind of makes sense, because then you'd get the worst kinds of discrimination. As opposed to acceptance, you'd get the opposite.
So people are very creative in how they offer affordable housing to members of our community, and the way that they do the outreach and the promotion of affordable housing buildings that are going up, in terms of specifically senior housing, which is what we see most of, is housing for LGBTQ plus seniors, not necessarily for single adults or young people. We do have the city's only LGBTQ shelter for young people in the Bronx, Marsha's House. But obviously, shelters are temporary solutions, not long-term. Right. Some people are pushing for more of those in all 5 boroughs, which is probably a good thing to deal with the issue in the immediate, but obviously we want people in permanent housing.
I'd love to sit in on a dialogue, this is just me talking, with real estate organizations, to say, hey, look, we really need to figure this out. And to me, that would be one good way of addressing it. For a number of times on this program over the years, we've done discrepancies in healthcare. And you and I, again, before the program, we're talking a little bit about delivering healthcare to people where they find providers who even understand what their issues are.
Right.
Is it a difficult issue? And then we're going to come right to you and ask you about the borough of the Bronx. In general, I mean, is it a problem? Does the medical industry understand that this is something we've got to deal with?
Well, I think we're doing a decent job in New York City providing culturally competent healthcare to LGBTQ plus New Yorkers. I think the issue is we're oversaturated. People come here from all over the world to be their freest selves, and therefore
God bless New York. Yeah,
the demand is a lot higher than what we can offer. So I think that's our biggest problem.
Is to figure out how to get more providers, at least to understand. Some may need, who are wonderful physicians, may need a new orientation or a little education.
Yeah, otherwise, if you're being treated by a provider who is not an expert in LGBTQ healthcare, you end up having to be your own advocate, and you have to teach them about how to address you and all these other things, and you just want to go there and figure out.
And goodness gracious, for a 16-year-old, 16-year-old has an issue, and for trans people, it's probably even more dramatic and more pronounced. I'm guessing that issue. Do you want to just talk about healthcare for people who are gay and transgender, et cetera?
Absolutely. We know in the Bronx that there are a multitude of services, and I think sometimes there is the issue of whether the resource exists. And then the other piece is getting access to the resources, getting the people who could benefit most to the information that they need.
I'm also concerned because some of the bottom line for all of this, and just thinking about, again, a young person growing up, being a certain way, feeling a certain way, sometimes they just need somebody to talk to. And that same study said 33%, that's 1 in 3, reported poor mental health access. We'll start with you and then go to you. Do they need specific providers who understand? Do you think every therapist out there gets it? I mean, where are we at? I mean, because that number, again, the numbers are so disturbing. And Ms. Crespo used the word marginalized. These are the way that people get marginalized. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Absolutely. So when it comes to, I think it goes back to what Elisa was discussing about cultural competency, and finding that, when it comes to youth, a lot of times that peer advocacy is what really makes a difference. Young people will talk to each other before they speak to us as adults.
And that's a mixed bag. In other words, that can be good and bad, because of course you can hear all kinds of things in the street,
exactly,
which we've all heard growing up in the Bronx. We all know, which can be useful or exactly the opposite.
Right. But having programs that exist to kind of train the trainer and teach young people how to be those peer advocates and how to approach these conversations.
Do you think our community centers are, because to me that's a place where young people gather, do you think that that they get it, that they're sensitive enough to figure out, well, we've got to cordon off a way to handle this? Or is it a process that's still in progress?
So I don't think there's any, but I'm not sure what the mandates are as far as creating as any training or anything that exists programming wise, but I know that we do have many providers that do an amazing job. Just because it's kind of ingrained in their mission, starting with Destination Tomorrow, the LGBTQ Center in the Bronx, and, our government partners at the Commission on Human Rights and community leaders. It is a priority for people. So, we've seen amazing things, but I haven't seen anything that kind of mandates it and takes it across the board. Mm-hmm.
To me, because we always want to talk to people, reach out, right? Destination Tomorrow is a good place. If you want to reach out to the borough president's office, they will absolutely connect you, and figure out a way to assist you. So let's just talk about legislation.
Sure.
And I know that it's something that's among the things that you work on. Where are we at? Do you have anything on the table that's going to come up in the state in January once they get back to session? And what are your priorities?
So some of the unfinished business is the way I will characterize it from last year are bills like the Gender Identity, Respect, Dignity, and Safety Act, which tackles how we treat transgender, gender expansive, intersex people who are incarcerated in our state's prisons and jails. Fundamentally, what we're trying to do is house people according to their gender identity and expression, trying to ensure that trans people are not discriminated against while they are in custody, addressing people by the correct pronouns, ensuring they get access to commissary items that match their gender identity and expression, and limiting the amount of time that we place transgender people in protective custody, because that's often a way that correctional facilities handle trans people when they don't know what else to do, as they put us in what is otherwise known as solitary confinement.
It's something that I think people never consider. Our jails have so many problems. We need to do about 5 shows on Rikers, but it never occurred to me, and probably to the general public in general. So if you have somebody who comes in and then they don't know where to house them, so to speak, what is the answer to that? I mean, to ask the correctional system to carve out a new way of doing things, boy, we're just trying to get some basic fundamentals there. But where is that at, and what would the legislation call for?
So the legislation calls for presumptively housing people according to their gender identity and expression, unless they otherwise tell you something different. It's about putting people where they say they feel most safe. I think prisons and jails are historically sex-segregated facilities, and so it's really hard for people to reimagine how we house people in jails. There are processes that exist.
Excuse me, when you presented this to me, it was an eye-opener, and I was like, wow, you're right, because put them in the men's side of the room. It's bad enough we're dealing with bathrooms in some cases, but this, of course, is much more personal. Right?
Yeah. So there are processes that exist. Some people are housed according to their gender identity and expression, but the overwhelming amount of trans people that are held in custody in our state's prisons and jails, and we know because we work with a lot of public defenders and people who are working inside of the jails, are not housed according to their gender identity or expression. And sometimes knowing what paperwork to fill out or who to talk to internally, not having an advocate on staff internally, and specifically in the case of Rikers, we saw a lot of work being done to fix this issue, but we took 2 steps forward and then 1 step back when the 3-member LGBTQ unit at Rikers was depleted altogether.
Let's just move to another thing, and then we'll bring Ms. Gomez into this dialogue also, and that is about curriculums in schools. Now, we know what's going on in Florida and in many states across the country. Do you have a sense that New York City schools, and it would have to be at even the basic level, teach acceptance all along in an appropriate way, or do we still have a ways to go?
New York City specifically, some of our schools are voluntarily teaching about LGBTQ history or inclusive curriculum. It is not a mandate. We're really pushing on a statewide level to have LGBTQ inclusive curriculum be a part of our public school system. We find that when young LGBT people see themselves reflected in successful stories, when they learn about the Marsha P. Johnsons, the Sylvia Riveras, the Harvey Milks, etc., we find that has a positive impact on them.
Well, because they're heroes, like we have many American heroes in all different aspects of our life.
And we think that they and as well as their allies in the schools should be taught about these people.
And is there space in the curriculum that you're aware of that to really handle it? Because it sounds, the word that's used out there, which is so disturbing, is indoctrination. And it's like we're not indoctrinating.
Yeah.
We're trying to educate. But do you have a sense that there's some forward motion? And again, I like to think in the Bronx and in New York City we're a little different. Am I naive?
Perhaps. I would say that there is work being done. First of all, I want to say that LGBTQ history is American history, right? Just like, we have this issue not just when it comes to LGBTQ curriculum, but when it comes to learning about the history of slavery or anything that people want to shy away from or hide,
right.
And act like, revisionist history. They just want to push back against it. So it's not just on the issue of LGBTQ inclusive curriculum, but it's a very similar issue that we have. I think that we have to work with the Board of Regents. We have to work with, the unions. We have to, because we...
And that's what you do with the new Pride agenda.
That's what we are going to do, yes.
I want to just ask about the culture in the Bronx. Somebody mentioned to me, and I was not aware of it, and we were just talking about it beforehand, that there were no gay bars in the Bronx. And now Ms. Crespo mentioned that there was one over in Woodlawn, but I was not. Just talk about the culture that people want to gather together and like you do everywhere else in the city, it would seem. Where are we at and how do we move this forward? This is a big thing to me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Gary. When it comes to nightlife, there really isn't an LGBTQ nightlife here in the Bronx. There was, as you mentioned, the one bar, unfortunately, is not there. But
it's not there anymore. That's
it's not there anymore.
Heard.
So one of the, just going back to the task force, just bringing positive visibility. While we know that there are LGBTQ-owned businesses, people may not feel as safe in advertising that fact.
I believe that if you say, okay, so you have a gay bar or whatever, I think that's a big thing. I have to tell you, because what I hear and what we seem to need to do is really just change the culture so there's awareness or whatever you want to call it. And if people can socialize together, we can maybe work together and solve some problems. Before we run out of time, what's on your list and what's on the task force's list like next? And what are you doing next?
Absolutely. So definitely outreach and education. We had a wonderful event last year for youth, for LGBTQ youth, about professional development and navigating the workplace, conflict resolution, advocacy that may look different for LGBT youth. We have National Coming Out Day coming up, where we'll be doing something, as well as towards the end of the year, we always have a World AIDS Day event as well.
I just want to mention, because I know it's important to you and your colleagues in the Borough President's office, these issues are not very far from her mind usually. Right? She's thinking about these things. So again, reach out, folks. Don't be alone. That's a very important thing.
Yeah.
And for you, when after you leave here and get back to work, because I know you work hard every day, what's first thing on your mind?
Look, we're organizing a vigil and a Vogue as an act of resistance for O'Shea Sibley, whose life was taken as a result of homophobia. We're working to build statewide powers, satellite offices, regional organizers, and pushing our legislative agenda next session.
Listen, you guys are great. Thank you so much, Elisa Crespo, and good luck with the new Pride agenda. Congrats again for being more famous than you used to be.
Well,
but that's all
maybe
good.
In the Bronx.
Maybe in the Bronx. All right. And for you, Nereida Gomez, thank you, and of course, thank the Borough President for caring about these things. All very, very important. And we will thank our producer, Rebecca Hemick, our director, Nick Marrero, the cast of thousands who work for us here in the studio. And if the curtain don't fall and the creek don't rise, I'll be back next week. Good night.